Hey, Mitch, remember the old days when we'd rip open a new MEGO monster toy and then we'd talk about that monster while I worked on an image?
I do. Those were fun days.
Right, well, get ready to have fun.
Good.
Because today we're going to talk about somebody who sucks all the fun out of the room, the Red Death.
I can't wait.
So the Red Death is a character that appears in some very famous works of literature and film, and he is just the last person you want showing up at your party.
Seriously.
I'll talk about my process at some point here, and we're even going to talk about the MEGO figure.
Yeah, because we messed around with it a little, made some modifications.
Right, but since all of that centers around this character, let me go over what I know about the Red Death.
All right.
The first time I became aware of the Red Death, and I think this is the first time he appears in popular culture, was in the short story Masque of the Red Death by Edgar Allan Poe.
Ah, yeah.
Now, I could be wrong about that being his first appearance. I could be wrong that Poe created the Red Death, and if you know different, let me know in the comments. And that would actually be an interesting continuing feature in the comments.
Yeah.
Let Vince know when he's wrong.
We don't.
I
think we might exceed our comment limit.
It's probable, yeah.
Right.
So, but as far as I know, the Red Death was a Poe creation. In his story, there's a village, a hamlet. I don't even know what they call it. A kingdom. It takes place somewhere around the 14th century, and there is a powerful ruler named Prince Prospero.
Okay.
Who, upon discovering that a deadly plague has begun to wipe out the people of his principality, I guess, or whatever, instead of looking for solutions, instead of offering assistance or doing anything charitable or benevolent in any way, shape, or form, he invites about 1,000 of his friends, the nobility, and barricades them all behind the impenetrable walls of the abbey, no way in, no way out, letting the unfortunate, the underprivileged, die in the streets from the plague.
Nice guy.
He is the nicest. Oh, and the Red Death, by the way, not a pleasant way to go. Upon exposure, victims are racked with sharp pains, sudden dizziness, and then, get this, profuse bleeding from the pores. Yeah. Death occurs in about a half an hour.
Wow.
Thankfully. So Prospero and all of his friends are just safely walled away from the plague, and they're just in there partying like it's $13.99.
Right.
They even throw a masquerade ball to celebrate how fortunate they are to be wealthy and privileged and to not have to worry about petty nuisances like a plague.
Nice.
However, at the masquerade ball, one of the guests shows up dressed in what looks like a death shroud, spattered red with blood, and the mask is the face of a corpse, also looking like it had been bleeding from the pores.
Oh, no.
He is just the embodiment of the Red Death, and he is upsetting the fancy people. And they try to unmask him, and at that point, the party literally dies. It's a bloodbath.
That is a suck party.
It is an awful party.
Yeah.
So the deal with the Red Death is, though, he's all about the blood and the blood imagery. So when I painted him, I'm using here like a very limited palette of reds and browns and kind of creams.
Okay.
Some gray greens for the shadows and details, but mostly I wanted the whole thing to feel like a hot, bloody mess.
Okay, but the guy in your picture's not a bloody corpse.
No.
I mean, he's pretty fancy himself.
Absolutely. The guy in the image I'm working on is based on the 1925 film version of Phantom of the Opera starring Lon Chaney.
So that's... How long after Poe's story did they make this movie?
Poe's short story was from the 1840s. So around 1910, Gaston Leroux had his Phantom of the Opera novel published. I think it was a French novel. I've never read it, but I have read the scene where, much in the same way Prospero threw a masquerade ball to celebrate their fortune in the Poe story, the French opera house in Leroux's novel throws a masquerade ball, and the Phantom shows up, dressed as the Red Death. But it's a fancier version than Poe's brutal corpse version.
Still a corpse, though.
Oh, yeah.
Still walking death.
Yes, still walking death, but now with a giant feathery hat, very regal, like a red velvet cloak that trails along the floor. I think he was not wearing a mask, though.
Oh.
But the Phantom's face is similar to a death's head. So I think people think he's wearing a mask. And I think that the guests at the ball recognize him as the Red Death because of his appearance.
Oh, right.
He's referenced in the text as the Red Death. It's literally written in gold on his cloak, I think. And if I'm not mistaken, he kind of kills that party too.
Some people.
Right?
So then, this version you're painting is from the Lon Chaney movie that came out about 15 years after the novel.
25, yeah.
Okay.
So the movie went with that big hat and feathers as well.
Mm-hmm.
The elegant red toga-type robes. He also had leggings, some of those Shakespearean bloomer pants, whatever those are called.
Yeah.
And it even added a staff with a snake wrapped around it and topped it with yet another death's head. It's a classic image. You've seen it a million times.
Right.
Originally, of course, silent film, black and white film, so we know he was the Red Death, so we can assume the colors.
Do you think the original costume was red, though? Even though it was shot in black and white?
I really don't know.
Yeah.
Remember when we found out that there was a studio fire that wiped out a lot of Universal's old film vaults, including the only prints of Chaney's London After Midnight?
Right.
Maybe they lost props and costumes as well. I don't know if that's ever surfaced. By the way, I don't know if you've seen it, but there is also a fun Vincent Price movie based on the Poe story, more or less.
Okay.
Mask of the Red Death, directed by Roger Corman, and I think Charles Beaumont worked on the screenplay, and he's one of my favorite horror writers.
Yeah,
it's a fun movie. The Red Death in that movie is more of a tall, faceless man in a red hooded robe.
Okay.
But, karma's gonna karm, and the Red Death reigns on Vincent Price's parade, too.
So the Chaney film was 1925, and then almost 100 years later, MEGO made this action figure.
Yeah. And then a couple years after that, I got my hands on it and proceeded to destroy it.
Well, no, you made some modifications.
And I didn't go completely nuts, but I wanted to get closer to the Chaney version of the Red Death. So I distressed the bone white skin, and I turned that red cowboy hat into more of a black pirate hat.
Okay.
Added some feathers. And I even threw together like a staff.
But you did not add bloomers.
I did not add bloomers. But to honor the film and the character, I wore bloomers while I was making all of these mods.
Nice.
Okay, let's take a look at this party pooper.
Red Death looks very proud of his portrait.
Yeah, as would you be if you were the harbinger of doom and someone took the time to paint your picture.
So this is something you might usually ink first. How was it working without the inks?
I think that it was a little harder because you have to use different values to delineate the edges.
Okay.
Whereas with the ink, I would have those solid black lines to rely on. But first, I do think it's good practice to force yourself to be aware of values where edges meet.
Oh, yeah.
Or to use saturation as a way to show distance or the hierarchy of importance. Second of all, I did go in afterwards, you can see, with colored pencil one more time to help carve out those edges a little more.
Yeah.
It's very soft without lines.
Yes.
And I don't think my brain is ready yet to accept that. Or maybe I could make it sharper with liner brushes, and that's just something that I haven't tried yet. So, maybe next time.
Well, I like it. I wouldn't want him showing up at my party.
No, not at all. He's a little extra. Now, if you enjoyed this and you want to see if I've improved at all, I'm leaving a link to our last Phantom of the Opera video where I was just starting to teach myself ink wash techniques, and it is a throwback.
That was a while ago.
Yeah.
But I remember having a lot of fun with that one.
Yeah, but fair warning, watching that video may give you sharp pains and dizziness, and you may break out in a blood sweat. I know I did.